So welcome again to this webinar for VISTAS on promoting your sustainability for your project. Sustainability is one of the key principles of VISTA. Today you'll learn how to plan your service so that you create sustainable systems that will persist long after the VISTA project ends. I'm your host, Kim Judy, from the VISTA Training Unit. Assisting me today are Robin Stegman and Suzanne Knisner, our partners at Campaign Consultation. We're here to assist you during today's session and help you get your questions answered. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Dex Devlin Ross from Bank Street College of Education. I'm now going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Kim, and welcome everyone. We're really pleased that you could join us today. As you can see here, we have 4 goals for the next 1 hour, but mostly we hope to get you thinking about what sustainability means in the context of your project and how you can go about promoting a sustainability lens in your work. Just wanted to give you a quick outline of the agenda we have laid out for you today. Obviously, we've covered some of the welcome and introductions, and there'll be some others that you'll be meeting later on in this session as well. We hope to provide a sort of big picture scope of the work, the goals, the project sustainability. We'll be taking a look at a report that VISTA produced a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago now. We'll also hear from some folks on the ground from Michigan in the Gear Up program that's taking place out there, very successful, and they'll talk about some of the work that they're doing around sustainability. Ultimately, we'll get a chance to talk about some strategies and hopefully hear from you as well around some of the strategies that you've used at your sites. And then we'll have a Q&A and a wrap-up, and then we'll be signing off. So to begin, we'd like each of you to weigh in via the chat option on your screen on this question. What do these images have in common? So take a moment and just respond, if you will, in the chat option. All right, I'm seeing some come through. Community, sustainability with the exclamation mark, lots of community, the cycle, wonderful. Interconnectedness, like stock photos, okay. The environment, lots coming through. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We really appreciate the feedback that you're offering. So, some people anticipated it, but in fact, because we are here talking about sustainability, it is sustainability that we have as the connection between those 3 images. So the word sustainability has become somewhat ubiquitous in the past decade or so. It's evolved from a call to action on energy and the environment to a holistic meta-concept or meme that touches on every part of our lives. Perhaps the biggest testament to this mainstream emergence of is its varied usage. Listen closely enough and you'll hear the term used as an adjective, sustainable living, adverb, living sustainably, and a noun, a life that is sustainable. Even traditional corporations that have often been faulted for perpetuating a culture of disposability and consumerism have gotten in on the act. The Patagonia Common Threads initiative made headlines a while back because it pledged to support sustainable consumption by helping reduce repair, reuse, and recycle its products. What connects the industry's organizations, initiatives, and products under the sustainability tent are the underlying values the word implies: openness, collaboration, health and wellness, engagement, responsiveness, diversity, social and environmental stewardship, smart technology, and even endurance. One potential pitfall of the popularization is that its meaning can get a bit fuzzy. While VISTA doesn't have a hard and fast definition of sustainability, sustainable solutions is one of the 4 core principles all VISTA projects must be developed in accordance with. Although the other 3 are addressed explicitly at PSO, this principle implicitly guides each of the others. Fighting poverty effectively requires the judicious use of a limited supply of human and financial resources. An empowered community is a crucial ally and participant for any project looking to gain traction and buy-in. And of course, the project itself needs systems and structures that can get the job done. So let's take a quicker and closer look at how this shows up in the goals of the project sustainability. Just really quickly want to note that this isn't meant to be a comprehensive list. Nevertheless, developing effective and efficient systems allows people to focus on fulfilling the mission of the project or its reason for being. This could be a volunteer recruitment or training system. Having that firmly in place allows the project to focus on its objectives. Note that we've highlighted integrity in the second goal. Over time, an organization may tweak its work. It may focus on a population or a region. The roles and responsibilities of staff members may change to meet the new needs. And that's okay and perhaps necessary in light of new discoveries or findings about funding opportunities. Relying on a single source of funding or support is a risky endeavor because funding priorities do change. Sustainable projects are always cultivating people and resources with an eye toward the future. And finally, transparency with stakeholders builds trust and concern that can turn into support down the line. So I mentioned earlier, a few moments ago, that 4 years ago, VISTA released a sustainability report. Its purpose was to evaluate the extent to which VISTA was achieving its goals of helping organizations build and maintain sustainable projects. One of the key questions the study asked was what percentage of projects continue to operate successfully 2 or more years after the project ended. Later on, we're going to take a look at some of the findings of that report, but we wanted you to know what you think. So we are going to ask you all to quickly respond to this. And Robin, if you might want to jump in and tell people, I see people actually responding in the chat feature, but there is at the bottom of your screen a place where you can register your responses in the poll. Excellent, excellent, great. Lots of variety coming through. We're going to come back to this a little later on, but we wanted to just throw this out as a poll question. We're going to return to it in a bit. So moving along. We've established the goal of VISTA projects is to persist well after VISTA has left. This hopefully gives you a visual sense of the lifespan of a project. As you can see, in an ideal world, the amount of time VISTAs work on a project relative to the amount of time the projects operate on their own is fairly brief. Many of you may have participated in the Passing the Torch webinar. And in case you've missed it, I invite you to download the PDFs on the campus. The focus of that webinar was continuity between VISTAs serving at the same project over a 3-year cycle. It's helpful to think about sustainability as continuity's older sibling. They're related but different. Whereas continuity is focused on the year-to-year transitions and ensuring that documentation is in place for the incoming VISTA, sustainability is chiefly concerned with how projects prepare themselves to continue their mission when VISTAs are no longer involved with the project. Another way to think about this difference is planning versus positioning. Sustainability positions people, others in the organization, or community stakeholders, and processes to operate in perpetuity, ongoing. It may mean finding and training volunteers to do what it is you do. It may mean working on a strategic plan with the organization to use resources that you've helped create. Continuity plans with an eye toward another person taking over. It's keeping all of the key documents that the next person will need in a tidy manual or a thumb drive. It's introducing your replacement to community stakeholders, all of which is hugely important. So, okay, I've talked a lot for the last few minutes. Time to change things up just for a quick moment. So remember way back at your PSOs, your facilitator asked you to draw a napkin sketch that visually illustrated what you expect to see at the end of your service term. Well, imagine creating a napkin sketch that captures what you would expect to see if you visited your program 5 years after you left. What would you expect to see? So, again, we have that chat feature. Just think about that for a moment. What would you expect to see when you come back after you've left your VISTA service site? What would you like to see? Lots of thinking. People stepping up, I'm seeing that. Prosperity in the community, growth, right? A fully developed volunteer database, more participation, full-time positions in the service learning initiatives, growth of the program. I hope you're all having an opportunity to see some of the thoughts that are coming in throughout the country around this. You have a lot of people that that have joined us in this call. Quantitative and qualitative evaluations. I'm seeing continued outreach, some successful corporate sponsorship programs, greater degree of comfort with technology, excellent national partnerships. This is all wonderful. This is good. Lots of interesting ideas coming through from folks throughout. Engaged community, says Victoria Cortez. Great. So we want to thank you for that, and please feel free to continue to share those. But I'm actually going to turn it over to Craig Kinnear, who's a budget and program analyst at AmeriCorps VISTA. And Craig's going to talk to us a little bit more about his work and about the report.
Thank you, Dax. As Dax previously explained, we undertook an 18-month project in 2010, or that ended in 2010, to take a look at answering the question of how successful is VISTA in developing project sustainability. And he asked you a poll question, and I see the results have come in. 47% of you said that 63% of projects were sustained after 3 years. 36% said 73% of projects, and 16% said 84% of projects. And the correct answer is 84%. What this means is that we went out and asked projects whose last VISTA had left prior to January 1st of 2008. We said in 2009 and 2010, what percent of those projects were still in operation? And 84% of them were. More impressive than this is that 90% of those projects said that they had fully or partially achieved their three most important project goals, which is critical in terms of VISTA's view of the projects. In addition, more than 90% of project directors and staff said that VISTA members were critical or very helpful in achieving project goals. Interestingly enough, just over 20% of projects reported that project activities evolved over the course of the VISTA support due to changing circumstances or new strategies and tactics. So, what characteristics and competencies did project directors and staff say most successful VISTA members had? The first one is a willingness to work hard. That might sound obvious, but it's critically important that because VISTAs are a short-term resource, that they're able to complete as much work effectively and efficiently as possible. The second is excellent communication skills. The third is creativity and problem solving. And the fourth is a commitment to the social justice issues that the organization was addressing. For example, VISTAs that were successful in helping their project achieve their goals and sustain in the long run were capable in these four ways. Inasmuch as sustainability is a goal, it must also be embedded in the everyday behaviors demonstrated by strong VISTAs. It is those behaviors, hard work, strong communication, skilled problem-solving strategies, and commitment to the mission that ultimately drive success. So take a look at projects that did not sustain. You're probably curious about what happened to those other 16% of projects, the ones that didn't sustain. Well, we have some information on those organizations as well. According to staff at about half of those organizations, the following reasons were cited most often for why projects were not sustained. First, poor organization and project management. And this is critical to you as well in terms of the importance of keeping things organized and keeping on top of project management and timelines. The second was lack of needed resources, either funds or volunteers. We know that a lot of you are primarily responsible for either recruiting and managing volunteers and or raising funds and developing other resources. And that's critical to the success of any project. Third was a lack of community support, which mainly means that while the organization may have believed at some point in time that they were embarking on a project that enjoyed a strong level of community support, at some point in time that support ceased to exist or it never existed in the first place. So projects should make sure that what they're endeavoring to do enjoys the support of a wide berth of their community. Finally, a lack of organization support often led to projects not being sustainable. In terms of organization support, you would think, well, if the organization developed a project, of course the organization supports it, but a lot of times what happens is projects are experimental. An organization who focuses on one very, very narrow thing branches out to a new project, and perhaps the organization decides at some point in time that project is not quite as important as they thought. So those are the four sort of weaknesses that lead to projects not being sustained. In terms of predicting, and this is different, we had the consultant take a look at helping us identify factors that could predict when a current project is likely to be sustained. So in terms of predicting that, the most important variables cited, and this is in order of predictive value, are, number one, the capacities, training, and dedication of VISTA members. You are the key ingredient to the success and sustainability of the project. Two, support of the project from the community at large. Third, the age of the organization and the organization's experience with project activities. And fourth, the centrality of the project goals to the mission of the organization. If you'd like, you can download the report right here. It's located in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Dax, I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you so much, Craig. So Craig's going to be around to answer some questions later on during the Q&A session, but we're now going to actually turn to Ingrid Clover and Asma Paracha. They are from Michigan's Gear Up program, and they're going to talk a lot about what they do and how sustainability really supports their successful endeavors out there. So quickly, as Craig noted, the success of sustainability efforts will depend on the good communication, and particularly between the VISTAs and their supervisors. A VISTA supervisor's role in promoting sustainability will be very different from that of the VISTA member, both because of what a supervisor does and because of the length of time they spend on a project. And to that end, we've asked Ingrid and Asma to talk about their differing roles, but also the ways in which their roles intersect. So I'm going to hand it over to those two now, and they're going to talk to you more about the work that they do. Ingrid and Asma, it's up to you.
Great. Well, thanks, Dax. This is Ingrid Clover here, and I am the VISTA Project Supervisor for Michigan Gear Up. Gear Up stands for Gaining Early Awareness for Undergraduate Programs, Gear Up, and it is a federal program to increase college access for low-income students. My office, the King Chavez Parks Initiative, won its third consecutive Gear Up grant, Michigan Gear Up, my Gear Up, in September of 2011, and this brings our state a $23.5 million federal award, which we match with state and local resources, and that results in $47 million over our 7-year grant cycle. My Gear Up serves a cohort of approximately 10,000 students from 7th grade through their first year of college. Our My Gear Up cohort is currently in 9th grade. We recruit our VISTA members to a large extent from KCP program alumni, and this allows us to create additional employment and education options for academically and economically disadvantaged students, as well as providing role models to our My Gear Up students, role models that have successfully navigated college access and success. Our My Gear Up Vistas are used to implement the My Gear Up statewide initiatives, such as financial literacy, balanced and restorative justice, and our statewide asset map and resource manual. And as you can see, My Gear Up, of which you can tell I'm very proud, is our state's largest college access program. We operate it in partnership with every single one of our 15 public universities. And as you can see, we are all over the map. We have VISTAS as far north, as you can see, as Lake Superior State University. We have VISTAS in Wayne County, out of U of M Ann Arbor, U of M Dearborn, Gierup. And we have VISTAS working on sustainable local projects, such as at Western Michigan University. They're creating some wonderful sustainable partnerships to support tutoring and mentoring, as well as at Lake Superior State University, of some wonderful sustainable projects partnering with the Department of Defense. And at Central Michigan University, they're doing really exciting things with social media. So those are some of the local project sites that are working on some really exciting sustainable initiatives. Okay, sustainability and scalability. Scalability is a concern for us because our grant, Michigan Gierup, operates on a much larger scale than many other college access programs. A lot of other college access programs will partner with maybe one university and serve a couple schools. As you can see from the previous slide, we're all over the place. So it's more of a challenge for us to do coordinated, program-wide, statewide initiatives. The VISTAS make that possible for us. And the VISTAS, working on the statewide initiatives, really preserve the sustainability of the Gierup program. Michigan Gierup is a competitively awarded federal grant. Our most recent round of funding in 2011 was very, very competitive, and several longtime grantees were not funded. Our next round of funding is coming up in 2018, and we expect that to be even more competitive. And again, one of the challenges that we face in our program implementation is serving such a large population and such a diverse population. And we're competing against states who, again, maybe partner with a single university to serve a couple of school districts. But with our VISTAS, we are able to implement statewide initiatives. We use sustainable system improvements and a train-the-trainer model, and with our VISTAS, we're able to, our VISTAS make it possible for my Gierup to achieve statewide objectives that, due to our program's scope and its size, would otherwise just not be feasible. So, our VISTAS also make it possible to make our projects sustainable across programs. Our office, the King Chavez Parks Initiative, manages a variety of college access programs in addition to Michigan Gierup. So what we do with our VISTA projects, we make those projects available to our KCP programs and other Michigan college access programs across the state. So, for example, one of the ways that we do that is when VISTAS conduct a workshop, say financial literacy, we'll invite staff from other programs to attend and to facilitate the event. This allows us to provide training and program materials to staff from other programs. And this slide, you can see, kind of gives you an overview of the KCP program continuum. We really like to view our office as providing a pipeline of educational programming which is focused on meeting the needs of specific populations of disadvantaged and underrepresented students by providing them with the necessary tools and supports to access and succeed in the next stage of their educational progression. So if you take a look at our pipeline, the first program that we have is Michigan Gierup. And Michigan Gierup serves students starting in 7th grade through their first year of college. Then our office also offers 3 undergraduate college access programs: our Forest program, our MyCup program, and our Morris Hood program. The Forest program targets students at colleges and universities. Our MyCup program targets students transferring from a community college to a four-year college or university. And our MHED, or Morris Hood program, targets students in undergraduate programs who are preparing for a career in teaching. And so what we do is we try to have cross-program collaboration between MyGearUp and those post-secondary programs. And so we've got our undergraduate college access programs. From those college access programs, our program participants can transition either into a career, or we might even refer them to our Future Faculty Fellow program and our Visiting Professor program. These are programs that serve graduate students. Now, one of the career options that we make available is, as I mentioned earlier, our VISTA program. We like to recruit alumni from our KCP programs to serve our Gear Up students. An example of that is our VISTA Asma Paracha. Asma Paracha is a proud alumni of the 4S program at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And on our next slide, you can see an example of many, not all, but many of our collaborative partners at Michigan Gear Up. And by making our VISTA projects available to our collaborative partners, that allows us to increase the scope of the sustainability. Okay, how do we assess sustainability? What does sustainability mean to our program? When we look at a VISTA project, when we determine whether or not it's sustainable, we use a three-pronged VISTA analysis, or three-pronged sustainability analysis. We say, is the project itself sustainable? Then we look at, does the project contribute to the sustainability of the program? How will the project contribute toward the sustainability of Michigan Gear Up? And then we look at, how will the project contribute toward the sustainability of our overall program goal, which is a Michigan college-bound culture? So, here's how that analysis plays out in one of our statewide VISTA projects, our Financial Literacy Initiative. Our Financial Literacy project is sustainable in that it develops and implements financial literacy services that remain after the workshop is conducted. It's available to program staff and participants after the project is concluded. Then we look at, how does it sustain the program? Financial literacy sustains the program in that it's a required program component, and a statewide financial literacy program that progresses with our cohort from 7th grade through their first year of college sustains our current program and makes us more competitive as we prepare for the 2018 round of funding. And then we look at our third prong. How does financial literacy sustain our program goal? How does it sustain our college-bound culture? Well, the scale of our program and the fact that we make our financial literacy program available across programs allows us to create almost an institutionalized culture where students have the financial knowledge to prepare for a college career. So in that way, it supports a statewide college-bound culture. Okay, what do the VISTAs do? What are some of these sustainable tasks that they work on? Our MyGearUp VISTA tasks include those that are required by statute, such as financial literacy and parent involvement, as well as other components that support college access and success, such as the statewide asset map and resource manual, which Asma will speak to later. Our MyGearUp VISTA tasks include work on these initiatives, as well as creating sustainable program partnerships, designing and implementing workshops and activities, as well as supporting campus visit and summer camp activities. Now, we received additional support regarding our sustainable initiatives with our 2013 AmeriCorps Summer Associates. MyGearUp received, we were awarded 10 AmeriCorps Summer Associates to support the work of our MyGearUp VISTAS. Our summer associates, each summer associate was paired with a VISTA, and the VISTA worked as a mentor to kind of introduce the summer associate to what national service in MyGearUp means. And this was sustainable in that it allowed us to kind of recruit some of our summer associates so that they would serve later in their careers as a MyGearUp VISTA. We also work towards sustainability through the use of data. MyGearUp is going to conduct a statewide evaluation of the effectiveness of GearUp interventions using student-level data. And much of this data will involve ACT tests, the Explore, the Plan, and the ACT. And information that we get from this data will be used to assess the impact of MyGearUp interventions on secondary and post-secondary educational outcomes, as well as to inform programmatic decisions and resource allocations. For example, we have a pilot project in Wayne County using STEM-based workforce development strategies to increase college access. With the use of this student-level database, we'll be able to look and see for every student who spent a certain number of hours in those workshops, we'll be able to connect attendance in those workshops with their performance on their standardized tests, as well as other academic outcomes such as GPA, advancement to the next academic level. And this is very exciting for us because MyGearUp has traditionally relied on school data, how students as a group are doing. So this will really be the first time that we can use student-level data to be used for formative and summative assessments. And at this point, I will hand it over to Asma Paracha, and she can talk about her role in leading, in shepherding our statewide asset map and resource manual.
Thank you, Ingrid. So like Ingrid said, one of our sustainable projects at MyGearUp, one of the many, is an asset map. And to give a little bit of background about the project, the asset map project really started at one of our GearUp sites, one of the 15, the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And we had a VISTA who was placed at that site, and under the direction and guidance of our supervisor, she created an asset map for the community that she was working with. And an asset map is really just what it sounds like. You map out the assets in your community, preferably with one issue in mind. So with MyGearUp, we're looking at education and access to education and access to services such as financial literacy that prepare at-risk students for college and success beyond. And so this VISTA created an asset map for this community looking at all of these different resources. And when we saw what she had done and the work product that she had created, it was so obvious and so clear that this was such a useful project. Because as a MyGearUp VISTA, not only do you have to kind of be knowledgeable and informed about the statewide workings of the program and be involved in the statewide implementation, but you also really have to know your community pretty well, whether or not you hail originally from that community. And so this asset map is useful in informing the VISTA as well as other people in that office about the community that they were working with. And really great information, demographics of the student population, different businesses that were in the community that were successful and actively involved in certain causes. And so we decided that since this is such a useful project, we should have one for as many of our sites as possible. And the idea is that when you put these individual asset maps together, they create a statewide asset map for all of our MyGearUp communities. And so we use a train-the-trainer model. The VISTA who originally created the first asset map, she came and trained our American Summer Associates as well as a handful of our other VISTAs in how to create an asset map. And those Summer Associates and the VISTAs went back to their communities and they created an asset map for their communities as well using her model. And so we completed this towards the end of last summer, and again, like I said, when we put these together, we have the statewide asset map, which is so useful, and we can also pull out the individual community maps for use in their offices and at their sites. And we're hoping that one of the next steps of this implementation will be to get one of the universities, one of their graduate classes, to pick it up and kind of really polish off and add to the map that is already existing. The asset maps are useful, again, on the office level as well as the statewide level, and they add to the sustainability of the culture, because this is a work project that will always be available to any new VISTA who comes in. A lot of the times the VISTAs that are at certain sites, they grew up in that community, they went to those schools, but just as often they didn't. And so by having this resource which highlights, the demographics and the resources in the community, it's so much easier, and it's so helpful for not only the VISTAs, but really the office staff in general. And it's, in a sense, a living document, because it can always be updated. And that sums up our asset mapping project.
So I want to thank both of you, Ingrid and Asma, for sharing what you shared. You took a lot of time to develop this, and it's really obvious, so we appreciate that. One point I just want to make as we wrap up your section of it, was just it's important to reiterate that the MyGear program is on its third grant cycle, and that federal investment, it really clearly demonstrates its belief in what the project is about, what it's doing, its ability to make an impact, its ability to evaluate its impact, and that all of that happens because of their processes and their systems that are in place. And so that's going to congratulate you on that work so far. They're both, again, going to stay on the line so they can answer some questions at the end of our session, which is actually shortly. But before we get to that, I wanted to share just some of the strategies and things that we might have heard today, or things that we've actually talked about in our smaller groups, just things that we think might help promote sustainability at your sites, and we wanted to share some of those with you. So to start, developing the broad-based relationships and partnerships that foster collaboration. I think both Craig and Ingrid have really, and even Asma's last point about making sure that you're thinking about these asset maps, because young folks are growing up in the communities and the ways in which they might be involved, and thinking about developing schools or programs for their communities. Developing those kinds of relationships and partnerships really foster the sustainability that we're talking about. Nurturing the community involvement, I think that's an extension of the point that I was just making, just to reiterate that. Being visible in the community, developing and executing an outreach plan to that end. So being visible means letting people know what's up, what's going on, how they can be involved. Extremely important. Evaluation, I think we heard both Ingrid and Craig talk about this, but particularly Ingrid talking about how evaluations become really important to their program. Evaluation is important because it allows you to both gather the qualitative and quantitative feedback, and it also helps you link the evaluation to the project success and then to the marketing that you do about the program as you move forward. So there's a lot of value in the evaluation. Being flexible. I think one of the points that we addressed really early on when talking about those goals of project sustainability were the ability to modify the project based on feedback and based on evaluation as well. Wearing the sustainability lens. And this is something I really liked about Ingrid's presentation. It talked, in all these different ways sustainability shows up in what they're doing, whether it's working with the AmeriCorps summer associates and thinking about how to get them tied in, or thinking about young people in the community. All of these things are about the lens. Even in as well, I would talk about how that feeds into the sharing. So that's inviting other programs to facilitate at things that you're doing so that they can be involved. You're sharing your resources. You're sharing your expertise. You're sharing your successes. All of that sharing helps contribute to an environment and to a culture of sustainability. We also want to find out from you. So we want to take a moment right now. We know we just shared some ideas around sustainability, but what have you tried? What are the things that you've done that you think either has been successful or maybe haven't been so successful, but what have you tried? So again, in the chat feature, if you wouldn't mind, a couple more minutes just to hear from you what some of the strategies that you've tried around sustainability have been so far at your various sites. Keeping records, absolutely. I'm seeing this come through. Databases, Google volunteer databases, absolutely. Using Google, very important. Meeting a wide variety of people in the community, extremely important. We talk about that. We reiterate that over and over again, I think, and even as far back as PSO. getting staff on board, using Dropbox, one of my favorite friends as well. Building that research, hugely important. Knowing what's already out there, decluttering, creating a community center Facebook page, using the social media, extremely valuable. Letter to my successor, I like that. Yeah. Compiling a list of things you can always be doing. Oh, very good. Thank you for sharing that, Lauren. Yes. Prezi for different training and zone administrative type activities. I don't know if all of you know about Prezis, but those are really cool ways. They're sort of like PowerPoints, but a little bit different. Look into those. Spreadsheets and binders, all sorts of ways in which you can just gather information. Community events, whether that's being there, thank you for pointing that out, Carla, whether that's being there or, presenting there. Annual corporate sponsorship programs, thank you, Amy. These are great. Creating college club chapters, excellent idea. That way you're making sure you're connecting with young folks and they're getting involved and they want to be involved as well. Developing strong relationships with alumni. We've got a couple more coming through. Excellent. So you can keep those coming through. I'm going to just slide forward to this next slide, and want to just offer a little encouragement because we know that we've shared a lot of information with you and that you all are all charged with a pretty daunting task, and this isn't easy, and it won't be done overnight. But the work that you do is extremely vital, so vital that we're having this webinar today about it. So we want to just leave you with a little encouragement. First, being proactive. So that just means don't wait until your last month of service. That's one of the first things we wanted to reiterate in this encouragement section. Begin today. However you can begin today. Being patient. So your organization may not be ready to implement all of your ideas today, and that's okay. What's important is you document the process, which all of you are pointing out in the chat feature right now, but that you document that process so that when it is ready, when the organization is ready, there's a plan that's in place for them to use. Be respectful, and this goes across all different relationships and the communities that you're operating in. So when and how you introduce your ideas can be crucial. And as you seek to buy-in from stakeholders, you should be sure to recognize community norms, organizational structures, and protocols, and be open to the feedback that you get from people, however that feedback may come. And finally, be creative. We can't stress this enough. We've intentionally resisted giving you a sustainability template here, even though we did discuss it, because each situation is different. You all have different environments you're working in, different communities that you're working in. So each of you is going to need to take stock of your situation and develop a strategy that's based on the goals of your particular project. So I want to leave you, and before we turn it over and start the Q&A session, with this final quote, because we like to close with some final quotes. The key ingredient to progress, to getting ahead, is to leave a foundation behind. Very simple, very sweet. Hopefully that resonates with you as well. So this time I'm going to turn it back over to Kim.
Thanks, Dax, and our other presenters. At this point, we are going to open up our lines for our question and answer period. Operator, can you remind our participants how to ask a question verbally?
Certainly. At this time, if you would have a question on the phone lines, please to press *1 and record your name when prompted. Please be sure your line is unmuted and speak your name clearly so I may introduce your question. *1, please. It'll take just a few moments for the first questions to register.
Thank you. While we wait for those questions on the line, I'll start taking questions from our Q&A section in the webinar. So the first question that I'd like us to discuss actually is a grouping of questions. We've got a number of questions that reflect that the VISTA members aren't working on tasks that are in line with developing a sustainable project. They may not be working on the activities listed on their VADs, or they might have been asked to take on a more administrative role at their site. I recommend that they bring these issues up directly with their supervisors, referencing their VAD and the VISTA project plan during the conversation. Ingrid, as a supervisor, do you have any suggestions on how they might approach their supervisor with these issues?
So in the event that a VISTA would contact me with a concern that the tasks were not directly related to the VAD, my first, step in the analysis would be to determine are they doing direct service or are they doing indirect service? And to the extent that they are doing direct service, to what extent is it related to a sustainable system improvement? For example, if I have a VISTA who is working to develop a curriculum designed to motivate student interest in STEM careers, that VISTA is going to be much more effective if the VISTA is actually in the classroom working with the students developing that activity. So I would look at that as permissible direct service because that relates directly to a sustainable system improvement. And then I would reference the VAD and see that it relates to the objective and the action steps. However, if a VISTA calls me and says the receptionist is on maternity leave and they're going to be filling in for a month, then clearly that's different because it's not connected to a sustainable system improvement. So again, whether or not someone is doing tasks that is within their MyGearUp VAD, the first step in the analysis is sustainability.
Thank you, Ingrid. Operator, do we have any questions on the phone yet?
Yes, we do. We have a question from Michelle Hall. Your line is open.
Oh, thank you. I was just wondering about, actually my question's been answered because I got some links on creating an asset map. So I'm good.
All right, wonderful. That's actually another group of questions that we have received in the Q&A section. Ingrid, VISTAS are asking, could they get a copy of the Michigan Gear Up asset map? And are there other, Dax or Ingrid, are there other sample asset maps available?
We can direct you toward information that you can use in compiling your asset map. At this point, our Michigan asset map is not yet ready for release. We don't have the necessary releases from all of our program partners, but we would be happy to direct you to resources that would be useful in developing your own asset map. And I guess I should make my contact information available after the webinar. If anybody has any questions, they should feel free to contact me.
And I just wanted to bump in, this is Robin, just to say that Andy, and we can post it again, and it will also be available with the resources following this webinar. On the VISTA campus, there is a webinar that we've done previously on mapping assets that actually Ozma was on. And as part of that webinar follow-up, and we can make this available on the campus, there are both examples of an asset map and a guide for VISTAs on how to create their own asset map. So that will be sent out to participants of this webinar as well. And you can see that webinar on the VISTA campus. We'll post the link in the chat again.
Thank you all. The next question comes from Rochelle Rice and is related to data. So her question is, do you have any suggestions of what type of data we should try to collect for our own programs? And how do we ensure we are collecting data that will be useful?
Craig, is that one you might feel comfortable taking on a little bit?
I think it depends what your project is, but anything that you believe is transferable to either your next VISTA or volunteers or project staff. For instance, if you're working in a homeless project, temporary housing project, anything having to do with homeless population in your communities, temporary housing locations, partners that you could, or organizations that you could partner with. A lot of data is available from the Census, from Department of the Interior, or Department of HUD. So anything that you think is critical to your project. Other than that, I don't have any specifics.
And Hi, this is Ingrid. I guess I can share some of the successes that we've had in gathering data. I've referenced our pilot project in Wayne County using STEM-based workforce development strategies. And one of our VISTAs got some really good outcome data for us through the use of pre- and post-assessments for his workshops. So we were able to write, before attending the workshop, this many students expressed an interest in pursuing a STEM career. After participating in the workshop, a whole bunch more expressed an interest. And so for every workshop that he did, there was a pre- and post-assessment, so we were able to actually show the improvement on a student level.
Thank you, Craig and Ingrid. Operator, do we have any questions on the phone?
Not at this time.
Okay. So another question has come up for, it sounds like a couple of people. In both circumstances, the project is ending after 1 year due to like internal organization cuts or other unforeseen circumstances. What suggestions or resources can you provide for implementing a sustainability into a 1-year VISTA project? One thing I might suggest for those of you who might be in this situation is asking to see a copy of the project plan if you haven't already looked at that. The project plan would have kind of outlined in a big picture the full scope of the VISTA project over a 3-year period. So by sitting down with your supervisor or other organizational heads, you might be able to look at what their end goal was going to be and see what steps you can take to at least get them set up to take that on after you exit. Ingrid, do you have? Oh, go ahead, Dax.
I would just add that one of the things that we talked about when we were looking at even specifically thinking about the goals of sustainability was, and something that came up in the conversation was just how important it is, and I think I've said it a couple times, just how important it is to identify, people who are in the specific community that you're already in, who've expressed some sort of interest in being involved. So I think extending on the point that you just made around looking at that project plan, but then looking at what discrete skills would be necessary to actually continue on certain pieces of the project, given the fact that the VISTAs will no longer be there. So being able to pull out discrete skills, being able to pull out what discrete bits of knowledge that you would need to have, and then who are the people that you could then identify who either might have the skills or might be able to be developed over a period of time that you have so that they can have the skills, so that when you do make the transition, that stuff will still be there with you. So again, looking at the project plan, pulling out skills and knowledge that are needed to actually implement certain pieces of that project plan, and then trying to identify people in the community who you think could actually fulfill and learn those skills, already have those skills and that knowledge, and trying to charge them with the challenge and the task of moving forward with the project.
And I guess I would agree with that approach. That's kind of similar to what we're doing at Michigan Gear Up through cross-program collaboration. I would identify other organizations that share your program goals and make your resources available to them through a train-the-trainer approach, perhaps, and collaborate to develop resources that organization can use after your own organization has wound up.
Great. Thank you for those. Operator, do you have any questions in queue on the phone?
No, we do not. Once again, though, *1 if you would have a question.
All right. The next question we have comes from Lynn Robertson. She asks, I'm working on a community-wide VISTA project with 10 VISTAs at 10 organizations. We work together to create a community-wide event, and I'm looking for advice on how to have this event continue after our program is over next year.
Wow.
Ingrid, could you perhaps apply the train-the-trainer approach that you just alluded to speak more specifically to Lynn's situation?
Sure, and if I understand Lynn's situation, the VISTAS are working to create a one-day community event, and she's looking at post-event activities that will sustain the program goal. Is that a fair understanding?
It's more that she wants to ensure that this community-wide event continues after the VISTAS have left those organizations. Okay, so in that case, I think it would be a train-the-trainer approach, and I'm going to think of one of our community-wide events that we have or that we're involved in at Michigan Gear Up is a STEM activity called Exploration Sensation, and the VISTAS at Lake Superior State University in the Upper Peninsula really take the lead with that. And they make it sustainable in that they recruit a network of volunteers. They use a train-the-trainer approach. They also create a network of partnerships so that in the event that Michigan Gear Up would not be able to provide the kind of support that it has traditionally provided, they've created a sustainable network so that the event could continue, I believe, in some format. Thank you for that. Our next question comes from Justin Smothers, and he actually has a question for Craig Kinnear. He asks, do you have any guidance or remarks about the VISTA strengths that lead to project success?
There is some more detail on that in the VISTA Sustainability Report. If you download that, and the link is at the bottom of your screen, and take a look. It's fairly well organized. The index has places where you can go that talk about predictability and also talk about skills of the VISTA. So that's where I would refer you to.
Thank you, Craig. Jacqueline, operator, do we have any questions on the phone?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay. Our next question comes from Jacqueline Spuzillo, and she is in a small town and has organizations in a high transient community. She happens to be in a fishing town in Alaska, but I think this is a common circumstance that many of our more rural VISTAs experience when they live serving in small towns with a transient population. They have 2,000 people in the community during the winter and then 5,000 in the summer with only 2 staff members. So she wants to know how can she approach her supervisor to share ideas that she has either found in legacy documents that previous VISTAs have left and ensure that those get implemented beyond the lifespan of their VISTA project. Jacqueline, one thing I might suggest is that you and really anyone who might be in the final year or if you are just on a one-year cycle in the final months of your project is setting up a time to sit down with your supervisor and start working on some exit goals together. What documents or legacy items do they want to see from you, and what goals, do you want to achieve before you exit, and what goals might you have, hopes and goals that you might have for the organization once you've moved on. Dax or Ingrid, do either of you have anything to add?
As I was hearing the question, I heard a couple different things, and I think the way that you responded to was one of the ways I was hearing it. The how, as in sort of what to do in terms, and then there's also the kind of how I was hearing in terms of how to approach this person. So I can't really read into whether or not what the nature of the relationship is, or whether or not there's a sort of open relationship. You have a kind of dialogue, a kind of relationship where you can set that up or get that going. But if the other part of the how question is what I'm hearing is what is the way to engage this person or engage the supervisor in this conversation? I always, because in some of the work I also do as an interviewer, what you really want to just sit down and ask them is really get a sense from them, and I think it was already pointed out by Kim, get a sense from them, what it is they're already thinking before you introduce the ideas, because you should come with the ideas, absolutely, and be prepared to share them, but trying to create a space where that conversation can happen can be huge. So I always talk about, where you have the conversation is huge. So you have the space. Do you want to have the conversation, at work, or do you want to have it out at coffee, or do you want to have it face-to-face versus do you want to have it online or over the phone? So based on the kinds of relationship that you have with them, if this is how, depending on what that kind of relationship is, I would encourage you to try to shape the conversation, shape all the different parameters of the conversation ahead of time, so that when you step into it, that environment is such that you can have the open dialogue that you really want to have.
And my suggestion for a VISTA regarding how to approach a supervisor with a project would be to tie it back to the program goals. If a VISTA were to approach me and say, for example, I want to create materials for a series of workshops, and it's related to this program goal because it will improve our students' test preparedness. And it's going to improve our Michigan Gear Up, our program, because it's going to demonstrate that our programming is effective, thereby preserving our program, Michigan Gear Up, through our current and into our next round of funding. And then the VISTA could also say, and it preserves our college-going culture, because by building a series of sustainable workshops that allow students to improve their test-taking skills, they'll be able to enter college-ready, thereby supporting our statewide goal of a college-bound, college-ready culture.
Thank you. Operator, do we have any questions on the phone?
We do have a question from Michelle Hall. Your line is open.
Hi, I was just wondering what kinds of ways could a person work with other organizations that are stakeholders to improve the visibility and the sustainability of the program. I know one person mentioned a fair, and then I was thinking perhaps like help with fundraisers for those organizations. But are there some other creative ideas that people have come up with to partner with these other groups?
Just off the top of my head, one of the things I'm thinking about is a campaign that actually where there's an intersection between initiatives that you both are, advocating for. So, it could be tied to a specific time of year. It could be tied to a specific event. But, thinking about a collaborative campaign, I mean, that's one of the ways, of course, that people engage corporate partners as well, finding ways in which things that if it's a corporate, partner that you're looking at, or a community-based organization that you're looking at, but the things that they already are attached to, or things that they already have a stake in or are already involved in, and building, again, I said, some sort of a campaign around that where you can share the cost of marketing, where you will be able to share both your base of support, and, you can really defray costs, but also kind of magnify the impact by looking at a specific time of year or a specific way or a specific event that's really, really hyper focused on something that you already have a connection to and a passion about.
Excellent. That's an excellent idea.
And one of the ways that we've worked to achieve that goal at Michigan Gear Up, for example, summertime is when our college programs do a lot of their heavy lifting. We do a lot of summer camps, a lot of college visits. So what we did is we asked our project sites to identify the dates for their scheduled college access activities, and then we made that information available to their legislative representatives so that our elected representatives could see what was going on in their districts, could come out possibly and actually participate in a summer Gear Up event. So I guess we wanted them to see for themselves exactly the good work that we were doing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great, because then you're more visible and then they get to tie into what you're doing and support it. That's excellent.
And we have no further questions at this time.
Next question comes from Rochelle Shute. She works in an organization that has just a lot of red tape, a lot of levels of approval. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get things approved than we all might like. So she asks, how do you maintain the momentum and excitement that might have started with the initial project idea so that people stay excited about it and keep moving forward? And then related to that, how might she address that in a sustainability binder for the next VISTA? So how can she convey that situation appropriately and positively for the next VISTA? And I thought in terms of speaking from one VISTA to another, maybe Ozma might actually be able to talk a little bit about how she might address that in a binder for the next VISTA. More of those soft skills you have to convey.
Being a VISTA. So I guess one of the things is to maintain to remain in touch with kind of the national VISTA and the AmeriCorps family. So within my Gear Up, we have 14 VISTAs currently, and it's easy to get caught up in your individual site activities and your individual site kind of tasks that you have to do. We all have a bottomless to-do list. And it's hard enough to stay in touch statewide within just your program, but then there's even a further layer where you have to stay in touch with the AmeriCorps family. And events like this, events like the webinars, different gatherings that some locations hold, and the Island forums, these are a great way to stay in touch, and they really bring you back to the foundational kind of knowledge that you gain at your PSO and in maybe the first couple of weeks where the excitement is a little bit stronger. And so I would say just to make sure that you remember that you are part of a national family and to do what you can to stay in touch with them.
Thank you, Ozma. Anything from Ingrid or Dax?
One thought I had, just as go ahead, Ingrid, go ahead.
I guess I just keep coming back to the program goals, and our program goal is getting low-income kids into college, and who can't get excited about that? So we have it pretty easy in that regard at Michigan Gear Up.
I would add just any ways that you can maintain visibility for yourself, but also for others around that, whether that's using technology or whether it's sort of analog style, whether you can have a calendar up that just something that keeps the thing present both for you and for other folks involved. And also celebrate the small victories. Chunk this thing down to really small bits and really find ways to acknowledge this. Even if it's like you just got one more bit of approval, you got through another stage of the red tape, just making sure that those sorts of things are acknowledged along the way, and that people are constantly in the loop around that and know what's going on. So it might mean a lot of heavy lifting throughout on the part of the person who's carrying that, sort of carrying that task through. But in order to keep folks really engaged, and I've seen it happen pretty well throughout, small victories, high visibility, don't let it slip in people's minds. And I think that's something that you can capture in in a manual as you pass forward, just acknowledging the importance of those sorts of things for others and I don't think that really steps on anyone's toes, and I think it really continues to address the importance of the project.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Catherine Boyle-Steed. She asks, what is a good online service to create an online editable volunteer manual? And so Dax, Ingrid, if you have any suggestions, but I thought, Robin, you might be able to point to some campus resources too. So Ingrid or Dax, do you have any suggestions for volunteer manual ideas?
I use Google Docs for everything because you can actually work on them at the same. I know a lot of people probably on this call probably use it themselves, but it's something that you can work on collaboratively at the same time. It's constantly updatable. It constantly automatically saves whatever the previous iteration was. You can also think about looking into creating a wiki. And a wiki is sort of like an online, it can be used as an online manual. And there's a bunch of different ones out there that I would just, type it into a search and you'll come up with different hosts for those wikis. I would look into those two as options to start with.
We do a lot with Google Docs as well. It really helps with coordinating information from all our VISTAs all across the state. Regarding a local listing of volunteers, what I would advise is defer to the local subject matter experts, the local boots on the ground. They know who the best project partners are. Allow them to be your subject matter experts, and then have them gather the information. And then once they gather the information, incorporate it in a format that, again, is accessible to your statewide partners.
Great. And this is Robin. Rebecca is right now posting the VISTA Campus volunteer resources that actually have a great volunteer management course that includes resources on everything from, tracking volunteers to how you recruit, so every stage of the game. So I'd encourage VISTAs who are looking for kind of volunteer management to check out those resources there, and because that could be really helpful in starting to think about how you manage and sustain volunteer involvement.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of you for those answers. Operator, do we have any questions queued on the phone?
Yes, we do. We have a question from Victoria. Your line is open.
Hi. We just had a question about direct service versus indirect service. We realize that in our VADs it's supposed to be indirect, but sometimes there is a need in the office to have an extra, the regular receptionist duties are to cover them, or occasional cleanup or teacher. I think that's the part that we're having trouble with, is the teacher part for some of our lessons, and to cover staffing. How would that fit into sustainability? Because it's helping in the moment, but should we really be encouraging this, or should we, because that causes us to ignore our VAD? Sorry, that's a whole lot in one, but that's it.
Okay. So it sounds like the question is how much direct service is too much. We would all agree that, especially in small nonprofit organizations, there's always a need and a time for all hands on deck, getting prepared for an event, taking a turn answering the phone. And if all staff at the organization are doing that, that would, yes, as you said, would be perfectly acceptable. The next part of the question is, but what about when it comes to actually supplanting staff, teaching lessons at the organization instead of a staff person who typically teaches? And I would say that that's always a good question to bring to your supervisor, first of all, to make sure that you're bringing that up diplomatically and asking them for their input on that, and expressing how it might be impacting your ability to accomplish some of the other goals that you have outlined on your VAD. And there is also always room for that sort of direct service when it is contributing to your overall understanding of your project. But it is a fine line. So, Ingrid, perhaps as a supervisor, you might be able to speak to that as well in terms of how you may have engaged your VISTAs in direct service and where you would see the line as a supervisor.
Well, to me, everything comes down to the nexus between the activity and a sustainable system improvement. Is the work being done in the classroom related to a sustainable system improvement, like ACT test preparation materials, like a series of workshops designed to motivate student interest in STEM? Or did the teacher call in sick and nobody bothered to call a sub, and you're just filling in somebody's lesson plans, which you shouldn't be doing anyway because you don't have the necessary licenses and certifications and you're exposing both programs to liability. That's a big deal. So everything comes down to the nexus. It's not that you can't work with the students in the classroom. What kind of work are you doing, and how is it related to your sustainable system improvements? How is it related to the policies, in my case, of Gear Up? And how is it related to the guidelines for AmeriCorps?
Excellent. Thank you for that, Ingrid. And I think that is a great place to start your conversation with your supervisor. If you feel you're not getting where you need to with your supervisor and you still have concerns about those activities, that's always a conversation that we encourage you to have with your state office. But the way Ingrid described kind of our, the philosophy behind that is right on point. At this point, we're going to start wrapping up our webinar. So I want to draw your attention to the evaluation that is on the left-hand side of your screen. We do like to hear your feedback on these sessions so that we can develop webinars of relevant topics in the future. So please take a look at that and take time to answer those questions for us.
We do have one more question on the phone line.
All right, thank you. We'll take that.
Jen, your line is open.
Hey, so I had a question about kind of larger contextual issues in the nonprofit world. Specifically, I work at a shelter that works with injection drug users, and we generally don't receive very much money from the government, and even when we do, it comes in kind of waves of maybe like there was a project here 3 years ago that was funded for a while but then eventually lost all the money. In addition to that, we feel like a lot of the grants that we're receiving have a lot of stipulations that require more paperwork and end up shifting our priorities from the actual folks that we're serving to getting the paperwork done. And we're seeing that as being a very big issue in our organization, and I was wondering if anyone on the call had any suggestions for how to remove ourselves from the nonprofit world in a way that provides sustainability and refocuses our work on the folks that we serve.
That is a really big question. Just to acknowledge, I really do want to acknowledge, I think, some of the challenges that you've pointed out are challenges that, in my work and in the work that I know some of my colleagues and friends have had just around the balance of paperwork versus actual work that you thought that you were getting into, and that's a challenge sometimes. I think that one of the points we talked about, early on was how do you create a diverse pool of resources, of funding resources, and it sounds like that historically there's been a particular form of funding that you've received and support that you've received. And I don't know, and I really don't know the organization, but I guess the question I would maybe pose to you necessarily isn't be answered right now is, who cares and who is impacted by the work that you're doing, and to what extent are they involved in either fundraising or in helping to support the continuation of the program, the life of the program. One of the challenges, I think, historically with folks working in nonprofit work is that is what you pointed out, is that idea that you're in something and yet you're looking for different ways to find funding for yourselves. But I don't necessarily know what the alternative would be for you as an existing structure, other than for you to dissolve the organization potentially and then to begin doing the work on a volunteer base and structuring it that way. But other than that, that's, I guess, part of the framework of the nonprofit as a sort of legal entity, is that that's how they consistently and historically operate. But again, this is you're right, it's a larger contextual question, and I would just, I guess, start with thinking about who else is impacted and has passion and cares about and has a stake in your work, and to what extent are they being engaged. If those folks aren't being engaged and you are only using resources from one funding source, then maybe that's part of the challenge that you want to begin to address early on.
All right, thank you. That will likely be the last question of this webinar. So thanks again to everyone for attending this webinar and contributing to our evaluation so that we can continue to offer webinars that are valuable to you and your service.